Hello and welcome to the 2021 Cal-ISBOA Annual Conference. You are in breakout session Technology Leadership, Setting Goals and Priorities. I'm Andrea Marcus, the Membership Engagement Manager here at Cal-ISBOA, and I am so pleased to introduce our moderator today. Tom Wildman, the founder and principal of Knowing Technologies, is going to lead a panel of tech professionals in a robust discussion on propelling education forward using technology. And with that, I will hand things over to Tom.
Thank you, Andrea. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's a gorgeous day in Northern California. I'd like to introduce our panelists who have so kindly agreed to join this discussion. There's Howard Levin, who is the Director of Education Innovation at Convent and Stewart Hall in San Francisco. This is his 34th year as an independent school educator. And in his early part of his career in the 2000s, he was at the Urban School in San Francisco. Howard led one of the first one-to-one Apple laptop programs in California. Since then, he served on the ISTE Board of Directors. He's been active with NAIS, and he's consulted with schools around the country. Thanks, Howard, for joining us. And then there's Peter Antipit. Hello, Peter. Peter has been working in schools for over 25 years. He started working in Massachusetts as a teacher. After he got his master's degree in technology and education, he became a director of technology. In 2012, where I met Peter, he was excited to join Crystal Springs Upland School as the director of technology, and later became the CIO, overseeing technology department and library services. Peter's also a founding faculty member of the Atlas Leadership Institute, an awesome organization which works with current and aspiring technology leaders to hone their leadership skills. And rounding third there is Fred Chepik, who is currently the Director of Technology at Laguna Blanca School in Santa Barbara. Frederick is an educator with more than 10 years of teaching experience. He's also deployed one-to-one programs, coordinated new database implementation. He is an advocate for blended learning and has supported teachers during this challenging school year, as all of us had. I am Tom Wildman. I'm the CEO of Knowing Technologies. And with that, let's get in a couple of things. This is being recorded, so it'll be made available by Cal-ISBOA after the event. You'll be notified how you can get a copy of it if you wish. And then one minor bit, if you have questions, please feel free to send it in a chat. I don't think that we're going to be able to do verbal questions, so just send it in a chat, and Andrea or I will call on you when it comes time to go to the Q&A sessions, which will be just after a few of the lively questions. Well, with that, folks, why don't we jump right into it? So this first topic is called Keep It or Leave It, the Changing Business of Technology. And with this topic, we're going to ask our panelists to talk about what practices have permanently pivoted for independent schools or are likely to. Maybe talk about ways that the business office relationship with technology is changing in order to support the school's mission. Another idea to seed the discussion is any long-standing practices that we've learned during the pivot or even prior to that can now be sunsetted. So we're not really talking about a background that is necessarily rooted in COVID, although we can't dismiss that. So that, folks, any ideas about, let's talk about that first idea. What practices have permanently pivoted for independent schools, or do you think are about to? So any one of you, just feel free to join in and don't be shy.
I will jump in.
Thank you, Howard.
I either go first or last. I don't know what that means, but I think it's hard to divorce permanent changes from the last 13 months, but but clearly the last 13 months have guided some of the things that I would say. One is this whole notion of thinking about one-to-one, I think, has pivoted significantly to the point where we need to stop talking so much about it, and everybody should be doing it. I think that it's not an if, it's a what's the best way of doing it for everyone. So for us, we just, for example, we just went K-12 one-to-one. Everybody's one-to-one. So it's just an assumption that everyone going down to kindergarten has a device. Um, Again, that was some of that was driven by COVID in terms of the earliest grades where
Yeah.
we were. Another piece is, something that's I don't see changing in a long time is pivoting to having outside contracts. So I know a lot of schools have outside contracts, and we are one of the largest independent schools in California. We did not have outside contracts, significant outside contracts going back about 10 years ago, but we do now, and I think we will never go back. Quote me on that. We'll never go back to a full-time network systems administrator who runs our internal system. So those are two of many others I could say.
Peter, Frederick, do you guys agree? One-to-one is the name of the game now, and it's probably time to issue it to students of all ages.
I do agree. I think also then looking from that point at access. So you've given them a device, and are you supplying access with hotspots for all students at home? Are you working with cable providers to get, discounted access, and is the school picking up the cost for that? Those are the things that are going to be definitely technology and business office related financial aid for, I think, from this point going forward. What not only devices, but how are you going to help students get access to everything they need? Also, following up on Howard, I think the outside consultants are definitely here to stay, and one of the main safety nets for us in technology, and should be of interest to business officers, is the reduced risk by having that. In terms of continuity, in terms of expertise, is really key. So I echo those two things from Howard. I also think the other one you can't ignore is working from home. Staff and administrators giving that, whether it's a perk or a need, or you actually need the extra desk in an office, giving the opportunity for folks to work from home, because we now know we can do it. Maybe not every day, but those are the things we're looking at.
Yeah, and that may be, I mean, particularly in California, that may be something that weather drives, or another disaster drives, not necessarily a pandemic. But yeah, we better be prepared. We've done some things to prepare, and some of those things are going to last. Frederick, do you have any thoughts about either that, devices one-to-one with all of your students, or maybe?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Peter and Howard was mentioning, I think one thing to look at is if the device is going home, you might still need to look at breakage might go up as well. So it's something to take into account, especially for the lower grades. The other thing too, sometimes we lose sight of, it's not just a device, it's all the mobile device management on it, like the actual total cost of ownership of the device, and as well as the PD. If we're going one-to-one, we need to actually support the teachers in that environment. And that piece sometimes get left out or not fully scoped out with the cost of that professional development. Whereas you're gonna use like an outside vendor to provide that PD, or it's gonna be inside, and you're gonna have to have the resources and the staff to support those teachers. So I think that's one thing to take into account. To go back to what Peter is saying about offices, I think it's opening up new possibilities as well for people to work from home. So if office space is tight in the school, or if you have to make choices between the classroom and an office space, you might be able to free up that. I think it's going to require schools to start looking at policies as well surrounding those office space, and what are the requirements to working from home. But I think for non-teaching staff, and I've seen even in my school where our registrar was going to quit at the end of the school year, but she didn't. She ended up staying because she's able to work from home. And that was key, because she's the only one that really runs the schedule beside me. And so that opens up the ability for us to retain some good quality talents, because they have the ability to work from home. Same thing for one of the employees, database manager. And for her to be able to work from home really improve her quality of life, but as well for the school, improve the quality of her work, because she's not commuting 2 hours anymore. So there's going to be a trade-off, I think, with schools, but it might be able for us to retain talent for non-teaching staff. But I think the schools will definitely need to look at employee handbooks and start defining what are the standards for that as well.
Do you, since we're on the topic and you've all mentioned it, do you all see any changes that maybe will be sunsetted, or we may have to have some new policies around breakage, around families paying for broken devices, devices stolen from cars, that kind of thing? See any pivot on that?
Pivoting to a some kind of BYOD program, especially for older students, I clearly is the way to go for many of us. I think that the challenge is to be thinking about, and a lot of schools are moving to, bring your own device programs where the legal ownership is the parent, not the school. And those of us that have done it, I think for the most part it's been a breeze. The push point, I think, is how far down the grades can we push that? So I know a lot of schools have been doing middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th grade BYOD programs. And I think that's also becoming more of a no-brainer. But looking at that K through 5, I think I believe we should be doing it, but it's going to take us a while to get there.
So there's been a question, I think, Peter, this is probably referring to your comment about outside contracts. What are you referring to exactly when you mention outside contracts?
This is not a sales pitch. I'm getting no compensation for this, but we work with Knowing Technologies as our network service provider services. So I can sleep at night and knowing that somebody else is monitoring the network 24/7 with alerts, knowing that if power goes out, I don't have to panic. Someone's going to be there to restart the servers. That's what I'm talking about, outside network contracts.
And to add to that is the level of sophistication in networks and security and everything the whole system has really shifted and changed in the last 10 years. And a lot of schools are still, I think you're putting way too much reliance on that one person's knowledge and skills. And it's far too complex now. So instead of having one and most schools are not big enough to have a staff like we have multiple people. Most schools have like 1 or 2 people that are running their technology program, and you're not going to find that. So instead of investing in that sysadmin, a network administrator, somebody like that, we, in essence we're saving money, and we have a team of, Tom never says how many people are behind. There's a large
Great
team
secret
out there.
And I think the other thing too, Howard, and because I'm in the situation, I have only one network and system administrator, and that's it. It's a single point of failure, right? And we try to avoid that at schools. Then having an outside contractor allows you to avoid that. So I think that's one thing that to consider as well.
I really view this as risk management. There's a reason that schools are targeted so heavily now for ransomware. It's because most schools don't have the resources to block it, to understand it, to recover from it, and drawing on a group that has that expertise and constant training and such that we just can't do, period.
Thank you. So another question, I think, Howard, maybe this would be to you. It's a tactical question, but with BYOD, how do you phrase your policy so you can block certain access? And you don't have to necessarily answer for you. Maybe how might one? What are some options for doing that? Frederick, you have some ideas too?
Yeah, I'll just say that we generally, other than very generic, broad-based, we don't block, and then we live into the mission of the Sacred Heart mission, which gives us the avenue of living in an atmosphere of wise freedom. That doesn't necessarily mean that it always works that well, but so we're able to use our mission as an avenue and explanation as to why we don't do a lot of that kind of controls, internet-based controls.
Yeah, and there are, I mean, I can tell you from our experience, there are many schools that employ DNS type firewalls and access blockers that are installed on the student devices that they take home that work, whether they're on campus or off campus. I think the challenge, the big challenge is if you want to try to do access control on behalf of the school's rules on devices that the school does not own. That's a pretty big challenge. I think as a risk mitigator, we usually advise schools not to touch and not to install anything on a student device because of the risk of that being compromised and then that blowing back on the school. All right, thank you. Let's move on. That's a really lively discussion. Again, if anyone feels compelled to ask a question for clarification, I am monitoring that and Andrew is monitoring that, and I'll be happy to bring it up if I see it. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about how we're responding and responding to and recovering from disasters. So you made a lot of plans. Maybe you made plans specifically during COVID. Perhaps you had them in place prior to COVID. So let's talk about what kinds of plans one might make that can remain viable, in fact, should become living documents that get refueled, revisited regularly, so they stay relevant. In fact, are permanent practices moving forward. So, so some of the ideas here would be, like backup disaster recovery, that sort of thing. So maybe you can talk about your ideas for what sane plans should be made and should be kept up to date.
I would actually start with a mini retreat, probably with the business officers and your IT team in terms of what worked at this moment, especially thinking about the tinderbox that we're living in right now with drought up and down the coast. Just think about what you did do and then update your business continuity plan based on that. Things just as continue to invest in your LMS. To Frederick's point, continue the professional development. We got so far, we kind of jump-started everybody. And then how do we continue that learning? Because this isn't going to be the only time we're all sent home, whether it's on the county level or the school level or broader. Now we know it can happen. So my guess is it will. So
business continuity is one name plan that you brought up, the idea of having a leadership retreat to identify those things. And maybe that leadership retreat could start with, identifying the risk. What are the things that will cause us the biggest risk to delivering the instructional product, a risk to loss of property, loss of admissions, of reputation, et cetera. Frederick, do you have an idea?
Yeah, I will include as well, to make sure to include the communication office, the ability to communicate in an emergency situation, the ability,
so like a communication plan.
Yeah, exactly. To effectively, and I think you want to be able to target specific population as well. If you have multiple campuses, if you have different grades, the ability to be granular in your communication is going to be more and more important. And not just emails. We're talking about texting, phone calls, like all those different means of communication. I think those needs to be definitely ironed out. The other piece I will add is because subscription for Zoom are expensive. So at some point, we're going to have to look how sustainable we can use, no matter what we use, Zoom or Google Meet or whatever, or Microsoft Team, and look how do we have to sustain that cost moving forward, because we're going to have kids learning from home because of fire or because of earthquake or because of mudslides. So that's the other piece of the equation that's going to make it into the operating system.
Trying to put a name to that, maybe that's like a hybrid instruction plan or a,
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Maybe what you wish, but that's another great idea. Yeah, Howard, you had an idea?
Well, I was going to say something along the same lines, but maybe slightly different. And that is, our business continuity obviously in a school, the business is teaching and keeping that going, keep teaching and learning, keeping that going. So it's not just retaining Zoom or whatever the internet, the video-based service that we would use. It's continuing to use it. I think that's the big push that we need to keep working with the educators in the school to make sure that there is a regular, that there's continued regular use in some way, in shape or form of both asynchronous and whatever you want to call it, discontinued, non-physical teaching, so that we don't just use it in emergencies, but that when we have emergencies, especially up here in Northern Cal, well, it's actually all of California, we know that the fire season is going to mess us up come August and September, and it's going to keep on going. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah, you heard it here first. So another idea to think about are some fairly tactical things. It's obvious that you have to have a backup and disaster recovery plan. You know, the data that you maintain and that you use, particularly business office data, has to be backed up with recovery standards. And maybe even some of the plans that we're seeing at schools now are server and cloud services plans, which talk about how we're migrating from a heavy server-based presence now to moving the services that we can into the cloud, where there's built-in redundancy and near automatic business continuity needs, and particularly for business office applications like Financial Edge, maybe even Razor's Edge, admissions, contracts, starting to think about a plan for moving those to the cloud if there isn't one already. So all great ideas. Okay, let's move on a little bit. No questions at the moment.
I just want to say one more thing about that, because I want to pivot off of what Peter said in the beginning, and that is, I think this is a huge issue that so many schools have put on the back burner because it's too complicated. Not there. The tech department can't do it on its own. The business departments can't. The advancement departments can't. The president, heads of school offices can't. And I love what Peter said, and that is finding a way to create strategic time just around this issue, even if it's for 4 hours at some point during the year. But most of the schools will not. It's too. The business managers could. The CFOs could take the lead on this and make sure it really happens.
Great advice. I mean, typically it's the business office, the CFO, that is responsible for risk, and so whoever that is should take the initiative and tap the resources of people like you to make sure that the plans are well thought through and tested and viable and complete. Thank you. So this next topic we're going to talk about is rethinking the roles of technology, the service model, and a little color to this. It wasn't too terribly long ago that the technology directors oversaw this really highly centralized operation. Maybe they maintain the website, maybe they actually entered data for the SIS, maybe they processed admissions, maybe for the more complicated applications, they just operated it like the SIS. And kind of the IT department was largely seen as the people that used programs, right? That used applications, anything with a computer. Some schools, anything that plugs in is the domain of the IT department. Well, that's not really viable. Let's talk about this idea of decentralization and what we can start thinking about in service models in the future. Anyone?
I like this idea where each of us starts one of the answers. So I think it's Frederick's time.
Nicely done.
We should have done a rehearsal.
All right, pressure is on. I mean, you mentioned the website. I think that's one that's naturally moving to communication offices for sure. That's a given. That's one that I see as a trend coming more and more, is communication and marketing taking over either the communication aspect, the emergency notification aspect, and the website and the management of those social media accounts as well. I think that's something that would definitely shed away to those departments, and that's gonna stay, which makes sense because they are the one in charge of the public face of the school, and I think it makes sense for them to keep ownership of those domain. The other one too, I think, is the SIS. Now a lot of them are just like cloud hosting services with great support on their own. So I think if you can outsource some of the support, instead of you an end user calling you and then you calling the SIS, you might as well cut the middleman and have them reach out to the SIS support directly. That's what you pay them so much money for. And I think that's one thing I've been pushing more and more my end users. So just call them directly because I'm going to pick up the phone and literally do it for you. So I think that's a couple of aspects I see here for outsourcing some of the domain we used to have to oversee.
So a question to all of you. Let's take an SIS. Let's take Blackbaud, for example. You know, the combined system that does web services, admissions, enrollment, contracts, registrar. It is a fairly broad application that services many divisions of your schools. How do you decentralize something like that where there's value in integration? And then in that, what role does the future technology department have in that specific genre of product?
So I'm going to jump in because I think we may be on the edge of, we may be on the leading edge, even though honestly, I wasn't really fully supportive of it when we did this. And that is that the whole realm of Blackbaud, which was a convoluted series of leadership between technology, the advancement office, the admissions office, and the academic offices, is now now that is being led. Now technology really has nothing to do with it. And it's interesting because when we went through this about a year and a half ago, it rubbed a lot of people, especially out in the tech field, as this was a huge mistake. And this wasn't necessarily my idea. I'm not taking any credit for this, but it has worked incredibly well. And it's an example where just because something involves computers and technology does not mean it should be led by the technology department. And so that's kind of that's a, you know, it's actually our academic team that is the key leader of Blackbaud. And then the rest of us have feeders into it, not technology.
Peter, agree, disagree?
So yeah, I mean, we distributed ours based on discipline, right? So we've appointed, essentially anointed, however you want to think about it, somebody in each department, advancement, business office. We don't use the admissions module right now, but to be like the main person, they have the ability, as was said, to contact support. So why contact us? We're just going to put in a ticket for you. You take care of that. Much more efficient way to do it. However, we're still asked to put in a ticket because is it a print driver or is it a query issue? So sometimes we are the middle person on there as well. I'm actually going to take a slightly different tack to that last bit, is you have to worry about creep. So if you start decentralizing without awareness of what people are bringing on board, you can end up supporting and paying for systems that duplicate what current systems do. So I absolutely am in favor of decentralization. I think it makes much more sense for the people using the products to have that autonomy. But the IT department needs to know what products are being used in order to eliminate redundancies, unnecessary redundancies. So I think that's really key in all this.
It's a great idea, and I will take that a step further and say that the IT department or technology department should in fact lead or contribute substantially to the selection process, vet the products, and ensure that the requirements of the product that is being integrated are very well known. The integration is tested against those requirements. And then you are really playing the role of an internal consultant. And I think that's a very high value consideration. But this idea, it sounds like you all agree that this idea of decentralization, that time has passed, and now it's time to implement. So if IT is still managing your data operations or managing data processes, that's probably something that we should consider changing. I think that's inefficient, and it puts too much on people that don't own those business processes. So I'm going to use that as a little a segue here, and let's talk about, I'm going to make sure I got the right ones. Yeah. So let's talk about given what we just said, that now the role of technology is likely changing from maybe more basic support of applications and intermediation between vendors and users. Now there are new roles that are emerging and new responsibilities that are emerging in the departments that you all run. So can you share a little bit about what those responsibilities might be in the future, and how do we kind of anticipate what new roles need to be created so that by the time the need is presented, we're able to source it? And how does the business office work with us in meeting that need, in consulting with us on what's coming? So swing at any one of those pitches.
I'm going to go big picture, and then hopefully the other two guys can go more micro. And that is, I believe that if a school is large enough or small enough to afford what I'm about to say, this is what you should be doing. And this gets me in trouble with my other tech leaders around the country. And that is that the leader of technology really needs to be an eclectic leader who understands teaching and learning, who understands business practices, who understands school leadership, and not just a super strong technology expert who's a good communicator, because it's becoming far more complex. And especially in a school, we need to keep, and often in working with the business offices and the development offices and sometimes the admissions offices and facilities, we lose often the other pieces of the octopus loses their focus on what it is that we're really here to do. And so that's a long-winded way of saying, try to find a tech leader who can translate in between all of these other different departments.
Yeah, with a pretty clear idea on the value chain, which is the instructional process and the instructional need. The tech leaders at schools have to understand what instruction is requiring and how instruction is delivered, what works and what doesn't work. They have to be seen as a competent resource to teachers. Yeah, Frederick, any thoughts on the idea?
Slightly different. I mean, I agree with you. I think, the ability to manage complex change and build consensus, I think that's a key for any tech director, independent school. The ability to understand the culture of the school is very key as well. I think that if you don't have that, you're not going to make any headways in a school. One thing which is a little bit granular here, in terms of needs, I'm thinking about professional development. Going back to that, I think it's one thing that you can start looking at PD, but not as just like a one thing we do like once a year or twice a year. We had an explosion of edtech tools because of COVID, because all of a sudden all the teachers had to figure out what tool to use to teach X, Y, and Z, depending on the subject that matters they were teaching. So I think there's two things we need to look at. One is maybe we need to start kind of like thinning the herd of all those tools to see, how much are we paying for all of those different tools. Some of them were free last year, but they might start becoming a subscription now. And so we might want to look at that as well and see if like any cost is going to come to our end. And then the last piece I will say is, can we build some professional learning communities within the school so you can have teachers helping teachers? And I think the professional development and the learning opportunities for teachers is going to be more spread out through the school year versus just a PD we do in September and a PD we do in June. I think that's one of the things that I see changing as well, hopefully.
Can you talk a little bit more about your idea on those learning communities, on how teachers gain support for one another?
I wish I could speak more because that's something I didn't develop. But there's this one school that I just talked to the assistant head of school there. Caitlin Gable did a really nice job. Maybe Peter knows them better with Daisy, of like having like instructional coach working with the teachers and really developing those skills. And I think that's one model I would love to explore myself even more, and how we can build that, because I think that's sometimes school are going to spend $2,000 to send the teachers to a conference. Could we use those resources internally to actually harvest each other's knowledge? And especially I think with Zoom and all those things, we might not have to ship people to conferences anymore, and so I think that's one thing that we might want to look at. The challenge I think is going to be looking at evaluation of teachers and see how the ability to do continuing PD and continuing education as a teacher, is it going to be part of the evaluation as an educator? and how the division heads or the head of school are going to take that into account when they evaluate teachers' performances.
It's fascinating. I like that you've brought up cost 3 or 4 times in this conversation. And so I want to ask the other participants, if you want to chat any questions, do you have any specific questions about cost or tools or something you want to ask the experts regarding how you manage what looks like an increasingly expensive proposition, please file it in and we'll fire it at the hosts, at the guests. Peter,
yeah. Can I chime in on this one? Thank you. So a couple of quick things when we're talking about, sorry, that was almost rude, almost so close. A couple of things, actually going back to the previous discussion too, is you talk about changing roles and staffing changes. I think something that could be of great value as you distribute the responsibilities of different systems is something that we have not done yet, but has been on my list to do for at least 18 months now, is a data committee, where you're actually looking to see who's collecting what data and what need they have for it. It goes to both the risk and the duplication of effort in terms of human resources there. Does everybody need to know the date of birth of every student? Probably not, but it's in their system. I mean, you know, if you're still collecting social security numbers, as I'm sure nobody is anymore, unless they're student employees, like why do you really need that data? And that data committee with folks who are entering data and processing data and thinking about the end, what are they doing with that data, could be of a great value. And I would grab people from the admissions office, advancement office, registrar. I mean, just as you imagine anybody who touches a database or might ask for something.
That's a fantastic idea. I mean, I hope that registers people. That's a really, really good idea. And so few schools focus on that.
To echo what Frederick was saying about professional development, we don't want to leave the administrative staff behind in that professional development either. And there's been a couple of threads on the tech listservs about what do you do to help school administrative staff get their skills up to speed. And I think that's a place where we often forget, because they often are siloed. Like they know Razor's Edge, they know Financial Edge, and they're great in queries and database view and whatever. But what other tools are out there that could actually assist in their work and make their processes work better? That's another thing I was thinking about. And I don't know why I wrote this down, but something about the administrative team. Maybe it's because we were talking a little bit about how the technology folks are seeing distributed services and are working with, I think as Frederick was saying, working with all the departments, and you don't want to have that voice missing at the table.
Yeah, to clarify, you mean ensuring that senior tech leadership is represented on leadership teams of schools? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
thank you for clarifying. Yeah, that was muddy.
Awesome. Okay, those are all fantastic, fantastic concepts. I hope I remember half of them. What a great wealth of information. Let's move on to another topic. This is, let's see here. Oh, so here's a specific question. Just a moment there. So a specific question came in, says we are being warned that cyber liability insurance will be harder to access and more expensive. Have you heard of that, and any suggestions about that? And if you have heard of it, are there any ways to mitigate those increasing costs? In other words, demonstrate that you have X level of protection, or anyone know about that? I've not heard of that, but this is a place.
I've heard of it. I know, but
to some extent I don't know anything about this other than saying, I think what's obvious, and not that this is a good thing, but we're learning from the insurance companies. So the insurance companies are creating guidances that go through the business department to technology, and then those questions get asked, and then we have to address that. So we are unfortunately responding to to what insurance companies are requiring. So it might be, and this is, I know nothing about this, but I think this probably becomes a really important vetting process for the business department in how you are choosing those insurance vendors, in terms of the ones, And this is really tricky, folks, because if you go too far towards the, we actually talked about this in a previous meeting. If you go too far in the legal realm, then you are cutting off the creativity and the pieces that we do to support really good teaching and learning. And if you go the opposite direction, then you're leaving yourself open for lawsuit and, the worst case scenario. So it's navigating somewhere in between that. And I know that that's a tricky thing to say as soon as we start talking about legal issues. And I think the business managers and the CFOs understand better than we do that decision that you make when do you go to the attorney or not. We could learn from the business managers on how to deal with that topic.
Thank you. I will also just give one advertising word of advice here that, there are many aspects to understanding your security risk, and many mitigations that you take once you understand what those risks are. And somewhere near the top, within the top 4 or 5 of that list is cyber liability insurance. So, I think what Howard is saying is you don't have to swing at the first pitch. You don't have to buy the first policy that's proposed, but work with your technology leader to understand exactly what is needed and ensure that the coverage that you're getting are actually for real contingencies that you may experience and not for some extensions thereof. So that's a really good idea. And Janet, thank you very much for bringing that question up. I'm not sure that we would have gotten to that otherwise.
I'm in on just one note on this. When you're vetting policies, make sure that they're there for you at the beginning of the process, that they're actually a sounding board and a resource for you and not just a coverage. That their policy is, as soon as the school hears of an incident, as the school, your job is to call them right away to figure out what your risk and exposure is. But they also will have experts to help you mitigate what may have happened right away.
Right, and I think what you're saying is, just to clarify your pronouns, is ensure that the policy puts the insurer in the driver's seat at minute 0 of the time that an incident is recognized, and pop them in that seat. Yeah, I mean, when it happens, everyone panics, everyone freaks out. You may think, call the police, pay the ransom. And calling the insurer is absolutely the best thing to do, because within the policy, it's they'll engage federal law enforcement agencies. They'll engage a whole department of people that try to find where the ransom came from, and another department looks to see if presuming this is like a ransomware, an encryption attack, they'll try to find, okay, well, how can we reverse this if at all possible. So very, very good idea. Yeah, excellent. Okay, let me see here, time-wise. I may skip this one. Yeah, I'm gonna just jump. Well, I want to ask this. Frederick, you talked about professional development as being important. What do you all, besides professional development, what do you all see the needs of educators, how the needs of educators are changing that affect technology leadership, that affect business office needs, maybe human resources, and what do you see for the next 2 years, if anything? We're trying to get an idea here of what's the future look like around the world of teaching that's important to business officers. If anything.
I mean, this may not be relevant to the business office other than money, but I see educators becoming multimedia experts again, and using microphones and cameras and other peripherals that had sort of dropped off the radar for the last many years, and that has really come to roost now. And so I think that there's what we're looking at is we're looking at changing how we're funding all of these school computer labs and reusing that money in other ways to support teaching and learning, not giving up that money, but plowing it into other areas, such as multimedia, and improved equipment for teachers and students.
You mean something to support their creation of content?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump forward one. So clearly, we've all had to support faculty working at home. There are new teaching models. How have you seen the need for the business office to weigh in and participate on what actually happens when teachers teach at home, and what are you being called to do, and new things, new policies that you may have to make up on the fly that weren't in place, all having to do with working from home? Reimbursement is one of the things that is on here as a seed idea, and it comes up at every school that we talk about. Should we give teachers stipends for technologies? Do we give them, what if they don't want to use their phone, or what if they don't want to use their home internet for some reason? Anything come to mind on the idea of how to better support teachers teaching at home?
I can take no credit for this, except I thought it was a brilliant idea. Our school allotted $500 per faculty member to use it how they saw fit for teaching at home, whether it was a new chair, whether it was to boost their internet speed, whether it was for a second monitor, whatever, a laptop stand, X amount of dollars per faculty member. So it was distributed equitably, or equally, I should say, not equitably, equally. And that seemed to go a long way to helping faculty just sort of offset some of their expenses that they weren't expecting. People appreciated that.
Did you all, are you aware of any other schools, Howard or Frederick, that also provided a similar kind of a stipend? And is it ongoing, like post-COVID?
We give a
Yeah.
We give a very small. There's a very small amount of money that, it's like very small amount of money. I think per month in people's paychecks, just to mitigate that demand, or the request for reimbursement for home internet access.
Okay.
The thing, we did a few stipend, but nothing specific, nothing that big.
Gotcha. Okay.
I to some extent, I think the bigger issue is, it's not been, I don't think that the money issue has been an issue for us that much. It's been more of the lack of consistency of home internet connectivity, especially when teachers were at home. So I don't think that's going to go away soon. And this is, I know legally we can't do this, but what I would love to do is I would love to have a phrase in the faculty handbook that said the minimum expectations for you to be an employee of this school is that you have X, Y, and Z, and that you're willing to use X, Y, and Z for school and work related use. And
that's such a good idea. You got to wear shoes when you come to campus. You got to get yourself to work on time, and you got to have internet at home.
We're paying for a variety of people to have cell phones, and that, to me, it's just, and I'm one of them, because but I just think that's crazy. And I think we're doing it for legal reasons and not so much for practical, for use reasons.
So I think maybe there's like the germ of an idea here to engage in the technology leadership when coming up with these policies, just to make sure it's well thought out. The employee manual represents some cogent, kind of soup to nuts concept of everywhere and every way that teachers are going to be teaching. Frederick, anything to add before we move on?
Just to shift a little bit, I know some teachers are trying to recreate at home that classroom environment with whatever AV they have, whereas it's a document camera or some kind of stand to hold the iPad. So you're gonna have maybe an increase in those kind of peripherals. So it might be good to have some kind of policy as well. It's like, who bears the cost of this? How much is it gonna cost you? Is it gonna be taken within the departments or within the technology department or the business office? But I've seen that trend of teachers trying really to recreate at home their classroom AV equipment and how they can teach synchronously in a direct way instruction, which might not be the best way, but we've got to support those models as well. And so that's when I've seen some costs going up for that kind of teaching.
What I love about that is that, I'll get to you, Peter, that it also underscores your idea about professional development. You know, with better professional development, you can reconceptualize what does that home teaching environment look like. Peter.
I was going to actually just say, and that 80-inch TV has been really helping me a lot during my meetings. But the reality is also when the stuff comes back, you know, given housing and you know, are we going to really collect 75 external monitors? I have no idea what we're going to do with them. Really, iPad stands, maybe we can store those. Cameras, not so bad, but there's some things that are going to be just sort of you just keep it because we don't have a use for it. So thinking about whether you're going to try to collect, or whether you're going to stipend or whatever you're going to do with it on the tail end. I don't know how the business office writes that off or not.
There's
Obviously,
another plan, the decommissioning plan. Although
the decommissioning plan. Yeah,
maybe it stays because, you know, the fire season's a few months away. So.
agreed.
Okay, I'm gonna, just because of the time, I'm gonna jump forward a couple of questions and then remind everybody that we're open for questions 24/7, so until 3 p.m. today. So feel free to file your question in 5 minutes, we'll stop and then field any of those questions that you have about anything. Doesn't have to be a topics necessarily, but let's wrap this up with talking about the relationship between the business office and technology. And one of the questions is, how do partnerships in the business office, technologies, facilities, other departments, how can they work better in planning? Peter had a great idea about, okay, offsite, you know, let's start coming up with some of these strategic plans, identify the areas where we're at risk. Let's talk about data, who has to have access to data. So, you know, kind of if you would just give a brief read down this list of questions and give some ideas to the business officers that are in attendance today. How do we work better? How do we work better? And how do we work strategically? So we're not just solving problems that happened yesterday. We're looking forward. We're actively engaging in a cross-divisional strategic solution planning session. I've filled all I can, gents. It's up to you.
I think there's no harm in actually scheduling something quarterly, just to check in. What's on the long range plan? What's something that I have not heard about, especially if your technology leadership's not on the leadership team. Is there new construction or the renovation? Boy, the renovation part gets me every time. It's, you know, they budgeted for renovation, facilities is ready to go, and you pull up and they're ripping out a room and you go, wait, but cabling. It's
wireless brick.
Yeah, right. It's that communication part, specifically around, I've always found just new construction, renovation, those kinds of projects are what always suck up the IT department's time in an unexpected way. And that planning in advance makes a world of difference in terms of resources, in terms of how much time we need to.
Sure, there should be regular conversation with the business office anyway. Howard, Frederick, what should those conversations be about? How frequently should they be?
Well, they should be. I think we have to, we have to find a way to break down these silos. And there's a lot of commonality between the leadership of technology and the leadership of the business department in that we touch everything. So those are two areas that are not microcosms. Everything involves money, everything involves technology. And I'm hard pressed to find, and facilities is the third spoke on that wheel. And so I think, that building that 3-spoke model with a head of school in the middle makes a lot of sense. But as I say that, you cannot leave out the academic leadership because they are the most important spoke that then often are not part of that conversation. So I think we have to work together on pushing our heads and the leaders of our schools to bring together these micro groups. I think we already know that, and it's how to actually do that because of competing priorities.
Frederick, any ideas you have of making a partnership deeper and more productive?
I think one I see is within the budget cycle. Usually technology and facilities, they are one of the biggest operating budget in the school. and having a clear process for budgeting and having clear timeline on what's capital request, what's operating, and gives a little bit more, I will say, because we know we can project some of our costs because a lot of our costs now are tech subscription. We used to be able to buy a software and be done with it. That's not the case anymore. We have recurring costs over the years, and being able to give that predictability to the business office will be key in the partnership with them. So being able to drive that conversation and have a good, plan out process over the school year, what the costs are going to be. And it's pretty easy for us to have a good asset inventory and know what assets we're going to have to replace and what will be the cost of that on the capital request. So really try to build that relationship where we look at, what is the life cycle replacement of all the different assets we have, from laptops to document camera to projectors, things of that nature. And I think that speaks to the predictability that the business office assume are going to seek. The other part I will say is I will join Peter in asking people to really include us in construction. Construction, it's a lot easier to run a 1-inch conduit when the concrete is up than it's when it's poured. And it really drives me bonkers when I learn at by construction, like last minute, where we could have saved the school $10,000 and now we have to cut through the concrete because they didn't run conduits for us.
That will really resonate strongly with the people on here that have had to look at a slab of poured concrete and say, all right, well, put your conduit through there. Great.
So, even if you start engaging in a capital request campaign and you're looking to create new buildings, just talking about with the tech department, where's the fiber runs are, thing of that nature, you can really save money down the road as well.
Yep, good. So, I think some of the themes here I heard were, risk. Frederick, you brought up, stewardship, where you're responsible for the inventory, maintaining inventory, and business officers certainly love that. A couple other ideas is to engage in business leadership and the head of the school in talking about strategy and strategic plan. All of our work in technology should have some fairly short 1 or 2 hot tie back to some strategic goal. It's not uncommon for tech directors to say, okay, well, I need this because I bought it last year. This server is dying and it's 5 years old, so it's time to renew. So, you kind of get caught up in that really reactive cycle. We did it last year, so let's do it next year. Well, great subjects of conversation with people that care to are to talk about putting that aside, and let's talk about strategic objectives, strategic planning, and make our purchasing plans, our conversations about how we're going to meet your strategic goals. There is another question here. How do you all recommend that, and we have 3 more minutes. Do you all recommend that the school's IT director have a place at the leadership table in our school? Question mark. In our school, IT reports up to the CFO. So the CFO has to speak for him, and occasionally they miss something in communication.
Yeah, and Lynn, I'm just going to jump in because I feel very passionate about this, and absolutely they should be at the head of the table. I do not believe technology should be reporting to the CFO or to facilities in some schools, and that's why that leadership of technology, the tech leader really needs to be an eclectic person who can do that. But absolutely yes, and I've been writing about this for 20 years. So,
resounding yes. You're missing out.
Let's all end in a fight and answer this question, and then I'll hit the stop meeting button in the middle of it. The question is it recommended that the IT director oversee ed tech? Go.
I think ed tech should be overseeing the IT director. I think you have the question backwards. It's education first. It's hard to hire us sometimes, but you got to be looking at the bigger picture. So, and nice. This gets me in trouble, I know, with other folks in Atlas.
Nice.
Educator first, technology second.
Frederick, your idea.
Well, I can't speak more than what just Howard said. I completely agree with him. That's exactly where I stand as well. Nicely done.
Okay, you're all on the same side, Peter?
I agree they need to work together, overseen by one person. I think that sometimes it is not the IT director. They just have a different skill set than working with faculty or understanding the needs of faculty. So currently we're we're together in one department, and we'll probably stay that way. But I think partially because I was a teacher and I can understand a little bit what's going on in the classroom. So to reinforce Howard's point,
I think
it's all about the personalities and the culture.
you're all on the same page on that.
Yeah, and one more piece, and that is if you guys look at your schools and there is a separation between those two roles, and that they're not reporting either to each other or to the same person, then that's a huge disconnect. So that's a huge red flag.
It could be,
Yeah.
yeah, good call. Thank you, everyone, panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. It was fantastic. And to all the participants, you'll get instructions how to download this. Very valuable information. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks, Tom.